This is slide 10 of our 60s unit on Richard Nixon. We finished 1968, thank goodness. The winner, if you want to call it that, to come out of the mess of an election in 68 was Richard Nixon, and he will inherit a mess of a country. We're bogged down in Vietnam. The economy is a mess. I don't know why you'd even want to be president at that time, but Nixon did, and he was. So, foreign affairs is the biggest problem. Obviously, with Vietnam going on, Nixon is going to lean very heavily on his foreign policy advisor, Henry Kissinger. And this is Kissinger down here at the bottom. Kissinger had an interesting speaking style, his thick New York Jewish accent, talks like that, a very gravelly voice, and interesting guy. But Kissinger was Nixon's chief advisor, especially when it came to foreign policy stuff. Nixon's the front man, he gets all the attention, and it's his ideas, but it's Kissinger that does all of sort of the behind-the-scenes work. So it is Kissinger who will set up a program that comes to be known as triangular diplomacy. Okay? Now, obviously, as a triangle, this is going to involve three parties, and you're going to try to play two of them off against each other. Okay, so let's use an ABC analogy here. Let's say you're A. Okay, B and C don't like each other. Okay, and both of them are worried about you partnering up with them. So you, as A, go and meet with B. C gets very nervous and thinks, uh-oh, if A and B team up, I'm left out. So then C suddenly becomes much more willing to work with you. Then you go meet with C. And B sees A and C meeting and getting all chummy. And B starts to think, uh-oh, if A and C get together, I'm left out. So then suddenly B is more willing to work with you. Nixon uses this to play the United States' two biggest enemies off against each other, China and the Soviet Union. Okay. First, let's talk about China. Okay. Nixon would be the first president to visit both China and the Soviet Union while in office. No president had ever done this since the end of World War II. This is a huge deal for Nixon to pull this off. And the only way to get them to work with you is to go meet with them. We're the ones who need favor in helping bring Vietnam to an end. So Nixon has to be the one to go to them. He can't demand they come to the United States. So this is a historic first for Richard Nixon. In February of 1972, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but that's okay. It'll tie in here. In February 72, Nixon will go to China and meet with the Chinese communist leader, Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao. Okay? They will work out a deal to normalize their relationships between the United States and China. And to normalize a relationship between two countries simply means that the two governments are going to start talking to each other again. They're going to start working with each other again. Since China had become communist, the United States had cut off all contact with them. So this was a big deal. And there you see Nixon and Chairman Mao down at the bottom of the page there. Now, part of the deal was, if China would agree to normalize relations with the U.S., that we had to reduce our commitment to Taiwan. We had to accept a one China policy. If you'll recall, when Chiang Kai-shek loses his fight with Mao Zedong, the nationalists flee to the island of Taiwan and set up their own government. Well, the United States, not liking communism, quickly recognized that government. Part of the deal with Mao is that the United States has to back off on our open support of Taiwan. and recognize that Taiwan is actually part of China. Okay? Now, the Soviet Union sees Nixon and Mao shaking hands here, smiling for pictures, and working out deals, and suddenly the Soviet Union gets very nervous. Okay? They become more willing to work with us, because if the United States and China team up, the Soviet Union is screwed. So that was February 72. Nixon goes to China. In May of 72, Nixon will go to the USSR, the Soviet Union. Okay? He will meet with the new Soviet premier, a man named Leonid Brezhnev. Okay? Remember, Khrushchev was our last one, who dealt with Kennedy, and a little bit of Johnson, not much. But Khrushchev will lose his job over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Brezhnev is the next Soviet premier, and he will be the guy dealing with Nixon throughout the late 60s, early 70s. Okay? Worried about the relationship between the U.S. and China, suddenly the Soviet Union is much more willing to negotiate with us. And Nixon is able to negotiate under a, I don't want to say this, under a theory of détente. Okay? Détente is a French word. It literally means a relaxation of tensions, a relaxing of the tensions between two people or two countries or two ideas or whatever. Okay? For the first time since the end of World War II, the Cold War does not get worse with the next president. Every president since Truman had ramped up the Cold War. Nixon is the first one to step it down a notch. Relaxation of tensions. Détente. Okay? He works out a deal with the Soviet Union by which we would sell food to the Soviets, particularly grain. They need food. Their people are starving. So we are helping the starving people, and we're making a nice little profit on the side. So we're going to sell grain to the Soviets, and Nixon is going to negotiate a nuclear reduction. He's going to reduce the number of nuclear weapons being produced. First president since the end of World War II to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. That is known as SALT, and it stands for Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty. A Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty, meaning nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles. Okay? Brezhnev and Nixon will agree to reduce the number of nuclear missiles being built. Okay? So Nixon does a lot of good here. This is my sort of the beginning of my defense of Richard Nixon. I think he's actually a much better president than he gets a reputation for. He got caught doing what a lot of presidents do, probably. He was cheating. He's just worse at cheating. And we'll talk about that when we get into our next unit on the 70s. But that is it for this slide and leaves us with basically one big topic left to go.